Recently I was asked, how many stalls for horses did Solomon have? 4,000 or 40,000? And I replied, are you actually interested in truth, or are you just trying to present some apparent contradiction in the Bible to make it look bad? They then subsequently answered they actually wanted truth, and I asked them a simple question which answers today's title question very simply. The question was this: do these two things say the same thing? First Kings reads, and Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. Second Chronicles reads, and Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. He replied they were saying different things. So in his mind, he was adamant and conclusive that it was a Bible contradiction. He believed it was actually a mistake, an error. It was so clear to him. So I tried to make it even easier for him. I said to him, forget the 40,000, forget the 4,000, and I tried to encourage him to read it slowly. He then replied again and said ultimately he had read it slowly, I guess, if he's replying to the message, and said apart from the 4,000 and the 40,000, everything else is the same. So yes, again, confidently, the Bible is contradicting itself. Now, this is a safe point in my view to kind of bring up what some people say is the answer to this question. Some people say that ultimately all this was a scribal error. Just to kind of give you a less than 10-second kind of definition, don't time me, but ultimately they say, look, when scribes are actually rewriting these out, they just literally made a mistake in regards to the numbers, because 4,000 or 40,000 are basically very similar. It's only 1 0 difference, right? That's not necessarily what I hold to in this regard, but ultimately I want to let you know that because that may be sufficient to you in that regard. So getting back to the story, we had left off with me saying, look, forget about 4,000 and 40,000. Does everything else say the same thing? He said they did, right? So it was a contradiction. Now, I made this even easier for him. I basically posed the question again. I literally boldened key pieces of text, right? And asked him again, are these two things saying the same thing? And Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. And in Chronicles it says, and Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots. Now, although I had made it at least 2 to 3 times more easier for him, I actually boldened the text. He still said he could not see any differences, and he swore that he just couldn't see it and just claimed, yes, it's still contradicting ultimately. Again, I urged him and told him, read it again slowly, and presented it to him again. Finally now, 4 to 5 times deeper into stages of this kind of discussion, finally could see and acknowledge that they were not saying the same thing. Thumbs up to him for being honest, ultimately, right? But he said, look, they're not saying the same thing ultimately, but how does this make sense? And this is where this is the vital point, right? This is where most people should start when they have a question in regards to the Bible. Don't go to just some Bible opposing website which is saying, look, these are contradictions, for example. Go to someone who has a bit more understanding about the Bible and literally ask a question. Hey, Israel, for example, there's these 2 scriptures in the Bible, 2 references. They seem to be contradictory. Are they contradictory, or is there a better meaning to this? If he had came from this perspective from the get-go, things would have been a lot easier. But if you're coming with the preconceived notion, which he probably was, that these are contradictory, well, now you get people looking more and more silly, even as you make it easier and easier for them. Right? I explained it simply to him by saying one example is talking specifically about the stalls just for the horses, or the other example in Chronicles is talking about the stalls for horses and the chariots. Now, all this is saying, when you look at this simply in context, is Solomon could have at a minimum 10 horses for each chariot. If he has 40,000 stalls for horses, right? But 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, simple mathematics tells us that he could have 10 horses for each chariot if he has 4,000 chariots but 40,000 stalls for horses ultimately. But it gets even simpler, because from different references in the Old Testament, it tells us that at least one period in time, Solomon had 1,400 chariots. So that ultimately means if you take these 3 or 4 references in the Old Testament in Kings and Chronicles, that basically tells us that Solomon could have had at least 28 horses individually for each chariot. And if you look into some history about chariots, it wasn't necessarily that a chariot was just designated one horse. Some chariots could have up to 10 horses, if not more. Either way, Solomon had an abundance. He had ultimately, if you're talking about 10 horses per chariot, he had ultimately at least nearly 3 times as much of the bandwidth for each individual chariot. Now, he finally accepted what I said and gave me a thumbs up, and make sure you give me a thumbs up below the video as well to tell me you like this video. And maybe you might want to consider becoming a monthly supporter of the channel through Patreon, or giving a one-off support gift to help me make more videos like this a lot quicker. Either way, both of those links are going to be in the description box, towards the top of the description box. And maybe you've got a question about the Bible that you would like answered. If you do, maybe consider subscribing to the channels to know when we go live next, because we do live streams frequently, and answering questions is one of the things we do on those live streams. And if you want to see what more of our live streams are actually like before you actually attend a real live stream, watch some of these videos right here. These are basically the recent live streams we've done on our channel. Hopefully they'll be beneficial to you. Thanks and take care, and I'll see you on the next one.